All right, hi everybody. My name is Jason Hawes, and I'm going to be going over the article titled A Mental Health Needs Assessment of Urban American Indian Youth and Families. So I'm going to be going through the article linearly, and then I'm going to go ahead and jump into briefly summarizing my supplementary article and then presenting you guys with my 3 questions. So let's get right into it. So this was a qualitative study of community health needs for the urban population of American Indian youth in Chicago. It was conducted as part of a planning process for an SOC, or the System of Care. The participants were 107 American Indian youth and families, and they were assigned to one of 16 focus groups. And the goal of these groups were to discuss mental health needs and services within their community. So researchers worked with the American Indian Center of Chicago, the AIC, and they had 3 main goals. So they wanted to better understand how to incorporate the American Indian community in Chicago into community-based participatory research projects. They also wanted to identify the needs required to develop culturally appropriate services and address community, cultural, and social issues to better aid the American Indian community. So, the introduction just covered the fact that American Indians have extremely high rates for poverty, exposure to violence, mental health issues, and suicide and death rates in the United States. And so the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration launched the Circles of Care, or the COC grant program, in 1998 to help with the previously stated issues. They focused on designing holistic, community-based systems of care to support mental health and wellness. So the methods. The researchers adapted the Community Story Framework, which is a culturally sensitive qualitative methodology developed for use with American Indian communities. And it brings people together in small groups to discuss important issues within their community. And the researchers focused on 3 main domains, and that was mental health and needs of the urban American Indian youth, the available support systems, mental health services and utilizations of these services, and cultural and historical factors that could aid in developing approaches to meet these community-specific needs. Each group had 6 to 12 participants, and the meetings lasted for 2 hours. They're organized by age, so it's teens, young adults, adults, and elders, and they're generally mixed gendered. And so the structure of the groups were standardized in that they all had the same questions and the same order of questions delivered to them. And so 8 categories from the questionnaires were developed for analysis, and that takes us right into the results. So first was the community characteristics. This focused on the history of community, identity, politics, effects of relocation within community issues, and American Indian culture within the urban setting, as well as cultural traditions and practices. And one of the major themes that came out of this portion was this idea of gentrification and the issues that came along with relocation into these urban settings. Next were community demographics, and the most predominant themes here were violence, financial instability, and parenting issues. The mental health indicators was another portion that they discussed, and that broke down into both positive and negative. So the positive mental health and wellness aspects consisted of healthy lifestyle behaviors, spirituality, spiritual practices, and proper coping skills. Now the negative mental health issues that they pointed out, or these groups pointed out, were alcohol and drug abuse, as well as violence, gang participation, unhealthy lifestyle behaviors, stress and anxiety, and effects of poverty. Next were the factors of risk and or protective factors within the community. And so the protective factors were identified as belonging to a community in general, the aid that individuals receive from extended family with raising their children, and having actually been a part of an involved community that focuses on the youth and the family. So the most commonly cited risk factors were negative coping skills, so things such as turning to alcohol, anger, and violence, a lack of structure and guidance for youth, chronic stress, community division, lack of connection to the community, and poor communication skills. Next, they talked about definitions of mental illness, and the responses focused on achieving a sense of balance. There's also a stigma within the community and a general sense of distrust related to mental health diagnoses. And within this community, they prefer cultural definitions of mental health that pertain to health and holistic wellness. And when you received these diagnoses from outside professionals, a general sense of alienation from the community and even within the family followed those diagnoses. And also there was a sense of trauma that was discussed both on the individual and communal level. Next, there was the service system records, and that this discussion focused on the lack of program funding. So there were little improvements within the community. There was a general need for mental and behavioral health services for the youth, need for services that are actually culturally relevant to them, and the need for services focusing on social interactions and overall wellness. Next, they talked about the barriers to accessing these services, and these discussions focused on poor communication and a lack of knowledge about actually accessing these services, and more practical barriers such as the lack of insurance, financial issues, and issues with transportation. Once again, this issue of stigma popped up, and that there was actually stigma surrounding accessing these services, and a general sense of a lack of trust for these outside health professionals that were coming into the community to try to help them. And the American Indians within this community preferred community support and support from their family and peers rather than outside health professionals. Lastly, there was also acceptability of existing services, and this conversation focused on whether the service was perceptive to this community's unique needs, and whether they could build a rapport with these professionals, and they felt as if there was also a lack of quality services available for the youth, and just a general sense of issues surrounding community politics. Now, this research was heavily focused on youth-specific findings, so that they discussed a little bit about that as well. They showed that the youth were concerned with developing coping strategies for stress and negative life experiences, the need for positive role models in their lives, tribal identity, balancing community identity, cultural ties, and a sense of individual identity. Things such as peer pressure, cultural and spiritual health, a desire to connect to cultural and spiritual traditions, support from adults and teachers, accountability from adults and organizations, promotion of cultural pride, and a negative message that mostly pertained to young men, that there needs to be a standard of being strong, or at least having others perceive you as strong, which can lead to a sense of shame and embarrassment if you don't feel like you're meeting those standards. So this leads into the discussion. So the researchers felt as if 4 major themes emerged from the study, and those were such that addressing historical trauma and oppression can impair a community's willingness for change. The efforts to better organize politics and groups within the community is important, and that addressing and incorporating culturally relevant definitions of mental health and wellness are extremely important for successful interventions, and that a need for community-based and culturally relevant clinical services and programs will be more effective. So, their conclusion is that an effective intervention would incorporate methods to strengthen the community, building a sense of pride in their culture and traditions, and focus on preventative measures for mental, physical, and behavioral health issues, and that the enhancement of community-based support will all yield better results in the long run, and that their findings suggest that these individuals who are trying to come and help this community need to stray away from solely clinical interventions and instead focus on the at-risk youth and the family dynamics, and with a focus on culturally relevant interventions in order to yield better results. So very, very briefly, I'm going to go over my supplementary article, and that is titled Design of a Behavioral Health Program for Urban American Indian / Alaska Native Youths, a Community-Informed Approach. And this was research done by 2 doctors in LA County, and they focused on American Indian health and community and the unique stressors they face as a community. And they were really approached the research with a community focus and wanted to collaborate with and receive feedback from community members. And so they incorporated traditional holistic methods of health interventions with their current services. So as I stated earlier, the research was conducted in LA County. They had split up 67 participants into 9 different focus groups, and 8 community needs emerged, similar to the previous research article. They were accessing services, outreach and awareness of services, youth services, recreational services, child and family support services, child and family behavioral health, cultural activities, and culturally appropriate training. So what they gathered from this research article is that the sample felt as if they were invisible in their area. And that drug and alcohol abuse were identified as the most pervasive issues within their community, and that there's a general sense of a loss of their culture. So researchers came to a similar conclusion as the last article that this community needs to have more traditional and holistic approaches and developing a sense of cultural pride amongst the American Indian youth in order to yield better results. So my three questions, to you guys are, with America being known as a melting pot for cultures and one that is one of the most ethnically diverse cultures in the world, assimilating and a melding of cultures has formed a uniquely American culture than one that is continually in flux. And in the first article, there was a comment by one of the participants that said, "And so living in an urban environment, you lose those things. Unless there is concerted effort to take that cultural information and impart that to the youth because they're living in their own world. They go play basketball after school and they get integrated with other races and stuff. And there is a pan-racial ethnic thing in an urban area." So the question is, what are the positives and or negatives of this amalgamation of cultures? Second, what are some ways that mental, physical, and behavioral health services can incorporate more traditional or holistic practices to better serve the surrounding communities? And three, what are some techniques these communities can implement that can promote cultural pride in their youth? Thank you.